Greetings, welcome to Ghost R N.E.A.R, where we discuss and actively explore paranormal phenomena. I am your host, Keith Johnson, the co-founder of New England Anomalies Research, and I want to especially thank everyone for joining us tonight on our 11th anniversary show. So thank you for being here. I have a wonderful guest, and I want to say hi to Sandra, who's in the control booth again tonight. She's waving. I just got scolded by her because I took one of her sound discs out of the envelope and promptly left it at home. So I get a little scolding in the control.
Scold-worthy.
I'll be good. I'll be good from now on. But my guest tonight, I am so honored to have him, Jim Vieira. Jim Vieira, very talented stonemason, along with his brother. Also an author of Giants on Record. The book is Giants on Record, co-authored by Hugh Newman, and you may also recognize Jim from the History Channel's TV series, Search for the Lost Giants. So, no further ado, Jim Vieira.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Nice to see you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So, I'm going to start out with a loaded question.
Okay.
Do you believe in giants?
That's funny because in the show, they ran into the front of the trailer for the show is when Carlos Hayes, the son of Paxton Hayes, the explorer out in Sonora, he asked, "Do you guys believe in giants?" Right? And my gut says, yeah. And it's like, I do. And my brother said it too. And he's like, he was like Carlos Castaneda, this really mystical guy. And my producer's laughing. He's like, maybe next time we won't lead the show by saying I believe in giants. But I honestly do. And, all I could say is I can give you all the research. You've read the book. I'm sure you would agree. Yeah. It's a compelling case.
It's hard to put down.
It's hard, it's hard to not make the point that it's a really evidence-dense case. This isn't like a testimonial. This is like specific anatomic measurements of stationary objects over a vast amount of territory in an era of inefficient communication, reporting the same bizarre reality, if you will. So I feel like it's part of this idea of a lost world. And I study a lot of Edgar Cayce and the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, a lot of esoteric literature that has the same story about the past, and giants are a part of that.
Now, what first sparked your interest in searching for giants? Was there some catalyst? Or?
Yeah, there was, as a matter of fact. I was studying, being a stonemason, I have an interest in stone constructions, travel all around the world to different sites. But just travel in the woods in New England, I would start to see these strange structures that were, to me, they didn't strike me as colonial, like serpents of stone and snakes and stone mounds. And I started to wonder, is this are these colonial? It doesn't make sense. And I found a lot of researchers looking at the idea that Native Americans built with stone in New England. So I got into that whole idea of Native American construction in stone, in ancient times. So I started to read town and county histories, looking for reports of pre-existing stonework when the colonists showed up. And I encountered a report in the Town History of Deerfield, 1785, page 78, George Sheldon reports, 1875, an 8-foot skeleton with double rows of teeth with the head as big as a peck basket, found by Henry Mather, explored by or analyzed by Dr. Thomas Wilson, I believe, who taught anatomy at Berkshire College. I'm like, what does this even mean? 8 foot tall, head as big as a peck basket. So the more I read, through thousands of pages, I started to find similar accounts by respected individuals, anthropologists and archaeologists of the time, reporting just the most enormous skeletons. And then I found all around the country, and teamed with other researchers, and we have like 1,500 individual accounts of 7-foot and taller skeletons being unearthed, oftentimes by Smithsonian scientists, guys from the Carnegie, heads of anthropology and archaeology all around the country. This isn't like, farmers with pitchforks or people promulgating a hoax. This is like just buried obscurely in scientific documents.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, of course, a lot of this goes back, way back in antiquity, even especially here in New England. We have legends, supposedly lost tribes. But answer me, how come we don't go into the Smithsonian Institute and say, I would like to see these gigantic skeletons. Why is that?
It's funny because there's this mythology or this belief that the Smithsonian is hiding all this evidence. It's, I'm not saying it isn't true. In modern times, I don't believe it's true. I think you go back 100 years, and there might have been some funny business at the time. There was a particularly racist head of anthropology, Dr. R N.E.A.R, that you might have encountered in the book, who said some repulsive things. Back then, these theories were formed in the late 1800s, right, when they were destroying native cultures. So when we grew up to, I can guarantee you knew nothing about the mound builders, right? Like,
no.
Right, these native tribes and civilizations who built like 100-foot-high earthen pyramids with a 14-acre base greater than the Great Pyramid at Egypt, and all these incredible geometric forms and understanding of the metonic cycle of the moon, and just the most amazing things. I never found out about that until I was like 32 years old, and I studied, all these things profusely. So why has that been left out of the history of Native people? It's like, oh, they were disorganized and unsophisticated and not worthy of this, look, because you can't destroy a civilization and celebrate it at the same time.
Right.
To get around to the point is that, like, when these theories were formed, the new anthropology and archaeology, there was manifest destiny, there was all this political garbage and racism. So native civilizations, including giant, native rulers and a royal class, were marginalized as if they didn't exist. And all the accounts in the Smithsonian's records were just not even talked about by later heads of anthropology. And they, in fact, went after anybody who talked about this idea of giants in the past. And there was a battle, religion versus science, in the late 1800s also. So right now you have an anthropologist, and if you have a religious inclination, it's like a war. Like, I'm not going to give you the Great Flood, I'm not going to give you anything. And it works both ways, I understand that, but instead of meeting in the middle, there's this culture war that goes on in the sciences as well as politics,
Yes.
Yeah.
And Sandra and I are of the same opinion that kind of the religious faith and the scientific evidence and history, they don't necessarily clash.
Correct.
We find a lot of similarities, and this fits into that. And of course, you've got stories that have been told over the millennia and everything, and then you've got the historic artifacts and everything that often back these things up. But you're absolutely right about the mounds. When I was very young, I didn't hear about the mounds. I heard about Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack the Giant Killer. I heard those stories. And I did read about the biblical giants. I never thought of this as being in my own backyard, so to speak, here in New England. But apparently it has been.
All around the country. Not only did every native tribe had legends and myths about giants and little people. If you'll indulge me for a second, run through all the sources, like all the early explorers from Coronado, Magellan, John Smith, from Patagonia to Virginia to out to Colorado. They encountered giant native chiefs that they talked about, 7.5, 8.5 feet tall. Like specific accounts of how tall these native rulers were. And then you have the Bible mentions giants multiple times, but with the specific anatomic anomalies, 6 fingers and 6 toes.
Yes.
And there are petroglyphs all around the country, especially out west, that have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And then you have isolated Pacific islands with like carved 6 fingers and toes of giant hands. You have this myth and legend all around the planet. I've talked to indigenous people in the most isolated Pacific islands in Indonesia, and they have these ideas of giants and little people. You have Plato, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, I'm sure Madame Blavatsky, the Theosophists. They all talk about the reality of Atlantis, giants and little people being part of that population, and androgynous creator gods creating humanity. If you can swallow and believe all that, the bizarre and specific layout of what happened in the past is all the same with all those sources, which is mind-boggling. So for me, as a researcher, as a historical detective, that can't be coincidence.
Right.
Right? Exactly. You get to an isolated Pacific island and you find that. And I'll also say, in 2003 in Indonesia, in the Isle of Flores, they found hobbits. They found a human cousin that was 3.5 feet tall. And first they thought it was they thought it was island dwarfism and then like Down syndrome. But then they found another wave from 900,000 years ago, even smaller hobbits that came from Africa. So they are little people, that the Ibu Gogo that the Indonesians talked about, and that went back, their oral tradition understood that for 50,000 years, just like Aboriginals in Australia.
Yes.
So I know that's a long-winded version of what I'm trying to get at, but it's like there's so much evidence pointing at this.
Yes.
You know, it's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, and reading this book, it's very hard to put down. You know, and you want just I don't know if you can see. Just look at the shapes. Some of these skulls.
Oh, that's interesting. Skull elongation.
Yeah, skull elongation.
Actually, it's kind of ironic you open to that. Yeah, my buddy Brian Forrester, he's on the Ancient Aliens Alive, I do tours with him. He studies elongated skulls. You ever see the ones in Peru?
I've seen pictures.
They're crazy
of them, yes.
elongated
and some of them
skulls.
still have hair remnants on them?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All around, native tribes in the United States elongated their skulls. The Adena people on the eastern coasts that were in a lot of the burial mounds in the book, their royal class were over 7 foot tall, and the females were over 6 foot tall, and they all elongated their skulls.
Wow.
And they cremated all the regular members of society. So you get this massive burial mound, like at Grave Creek, you get an 8'2" male and a 7'4" female with elongated skulls.
Wow.
You know, it's really a wild thing. And it's also begs the question, all around the world, often in isolated places, people are elongating their skulls.
Yes.
What does that mean? Why the hell, like, oh, I'm going to elongate my kid's skull?
Right,
Like,
right, yeah, exactly.
What are you out of your
They do
mind,
the
you know?
binding with the reeds and everything.
It's such an extreme and bizarre thing. Do you think they're like trying to emulate some other kind of being or
Right.
some, who knows? But just to chalk it up to like the 100th monkey doesn't fly in my book, you know?
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. Now, tell us about your TV show that you and your brother were involved in, Search for the Lost Giants.
Yeah, we did one season of Search for the Lost Giants, and you know, you got to understand there's a entertainment component to it. I didn't have like all control of editing by any means, you know? So they hype a lot of stuff.
Having been
up.
involved in reality TV myself, I realized that there is also an entertainment factor.
Yes, but I thought it was, it was a cool show. And it was an honest
for every
investigation.
maybe every 20 hours of actual investigation, on-site investigation, you see maybe 20 minutes or 10 minutes.
Oh, definitely that.
You know,
Yes.
that's the thing. It's got to be condensed to be, to hold the audience's attention span. So.
Definitely. So we tried to follow through with some of these investigations and use resources and work with the research team. And, we found photographs and pretty compelling evidence of several 8-foot skeletons, over 8-foot skeletons, including one from Staleville, Missouri. And we found a tooth, which is wild, at the place where the skeleton was uncovered. I mean, I don't know if you saw episode 2 of the show, but that was the one we found the picture of the skeleton laid out with the 6-foot guy in the doctor's office in Staleville. And I found the microfilm live while we were filming, which is pretty cool, like in real time. But the tooth ended up being a bison's tooth, which, so it was like,
that's right,
but when we found it, we're like, oh my God, this huge tooth. And we took it to the coroner. But for us, it was just like trying to tell a cool story, go to these wild caves and show people that this is like, the reports we're talking about are by respected professionals, The skeleton was wired together, the town was abuzz, it was 8 foot 6 inches tall, it was buried with these Native American artifacts, it was, an actual story that was it's a part of history, you know?
Now, did the History Channel approach you and your brother about this research? Because when I saw that, I said, wow, I've got to watch this show.
I worked with America on Earth actually for like 7 months on an episode about giants because I had been doing a ton of reading and writing about it. And the show fell through for some reason, the episode. And my producer, John Marks, who just did, he did the Lacey Peterson show. I don't know if you caught that on A&E. He just did Road to 9/11. He's a brilliant guy. He's done like mob stuff, and he's my friend and producer. He contacted me and said, one of my buddies, he lives like 3 towns away. He says, you might want to check this guy out. He's got some really interesting ideas, and you might want to get him in for an interview about a show. So we went in, we did a sizzle reel, took it to the network conference. A bunch of networks bid on it, and history said, we'll go right to series without a pilot because they could tell it was a compelling, idea. Which I understood too, and I'm like, I had an office for 2 years, and we called it the Daily Giant, right? And I would just write, and obviously you're not going to like do any business there, but I knew it would be part of the show. It was kind of ironic. I said, to several people, I foresee a show on the History Channel. That's why I'm keeping this office, which was, kind of prophetic, and
Right.
I just knew it's a great idea or a topic that people were interested in. So I stuck with it, and I continue to stick with it,
And watching you and your brother on some of it was actually downright nerve-wracking.
Oh, totally nerve-wracking.
I see you spelunking, you're going down to this that's never been explored.
That wasn't fake. That was
that you're going down there, and I'm feeling claustrophobic just watching you. I mean, you're down in this pit, and your brother keeps calling to you to see if you're going to answer, and it's like, how do you know you're going to come up?
And that was a great case, the Bone Cave.
Yeah.
That 1872, there were numerous expeditions that went in there. The heads of the newspaper of the Manchester Democrat and the Manchester Times reported, including in 1914, the last people who were in there was the head of the Manchester Times, the editor, and a crew of guys with torches, and they left a giant petrified body down there, they said. They went into the water I did, but then they must have got stopped out at the end where I did. Mm-hmm. But that was all like legitimate, and the park rangers telling the same stories, so we had to squeeze through like the tightest. It was so nerve-wracking.
Wow.
It's like you had to.
You're not a small guy.
Inhale.
Either,
And my brother's big, and it was like. And then I go to the flooded tunnel, and I'm running out of oxygen. Like I got sick for 3 weeks after that too.
Wow,
So
I believe it. Yeah.
But not to be like a big hero, but we did our best to like investigate these stories and tell a cool story ourselves.
Yeah. Anything that's a small enclosure where water could potentially start running in. I mean,
that was nothing. And we got stopped up. They had life flight because of all the insurance stuff so that was a real hairy thing, but we want to go back there and explore further with oxygen. Right. We're pitching, we did that show, and then we did two 2-hour Roanoke specials for history, but now we're pitching a broader, like a Search for the Lost World show, where we get into ideas of the Great Flood, the Younger Dryas impact theory, all these new anthropological and archaeological mysteries that are kind of being brought forward and solved, and that harken back to mythology and a lost world. So,
I was just telling you off camera a little while ago how I'm working with Reimagine Theater right now, and we're doing Greek tragedy by Euripides, Troy Women. We're actually play Poseidon, but some of that may not be all as mythological as people think.
If you had me hooked up to the lie detector test, I would say Atlantis was reality. I swear to God, in the middle of the Atlantic. Edgar Cayce and Plato say it. Once again, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, so many sources talk about this place being a real place, but they talk about specific things like 6 fingers and 6 toes, androgynous creator gods, giants and little people. And then the world is littered not only with statues. I can show you so many pictures of statues and petroglyphs of 6 fingers and 6 toes, biblical passages. Wow. The giant of Gath, right? 6 fingers and 6 toes.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that level of specificity, you're just being disingenuous to dismiss it, right? Mm-hmm. And science has thrown out 10,000 years of evidence of, forget about the Library of Alexandria and the Mayan codices that were destroyed. Oral traditions, secret society literature, religious documents, myth and legend. Ask Carl Jung. The primitive mind does not invent myth; it experiences it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That Joseph Campbell. These brilliant thinkers understood that there is a reality to myth and legend.
Yeah.
And you seem to have a strong intuition. And you don't have to be convinced.
Oh, yes.
And you don't have like an objective bias. It's not like you're trying to prove something. You just know in your gut when something is true, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I want to specify, we're not necessarily talking about pituitary abnormality.
No, not at all.
Like Robert Wadlow,
yes.
a wonderful, wonderful person.
Yeah.
Never stopped growing, died when he was 22 years old.
Yeah.
His circulatory system just gave out, but he never stopped growing. He was 8 foot, something, but we're talking about hereditary. We're talking about tribes. We're talking about peoples.
Yes, no question about it.
Giants.
And I will add that a couple years back, a new human cousin was found called the Denisovans at the Denisova cave in the Altai region of Siberia. Mm-hmm. Now, the Denisovans interbred with humans and Neanderthals. And the only evidence they have of this human cousin are 2 teeth and a piece of a finger bone, and the teeth are so large they thought it was a cave bear's tooth. So they took it to the Max Planck Institute, and they realized, holy shit, this is a new human cousin.
Yeah, right.
And they found that it interbred like, and the Australian Aboriginals, the Australian peoples have 2 or 3% of Denisovan DNA, and Native Americans do too. So it's like, wow, how did they get across 8 ocean trips to get to Australia from Siberia? And they made a 70,000-year-old bracelet of chlorite that is astonishing. Wow. So they were much more sophisticated than Neanderthals and Homo sapiens at the time. Mm-hmm. So, and they have giant teeth. So is this the curveball we're looking for?
Right.
And did they interbred with humans? Or is it a supernatural thing you have to yield that, like, if you look at the Bible, they are clearly talking about supernatural events in the creation of Homo sapiens, right? So this isn't that evolution. This is the thing, that evolution in science and religion don't have to be in conflict.
Right.
Because evolution is happening. You can see it. Or we understand that on some level.
Yeah, adaptation, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean that Homo sapiens weren't some genetic creation. Mm-hmm. We're a pretty weird species and came out of nowhere.
Right.
In this current
Very
form.
suddenly.
Yes.
As far as history of the Earth goes, of life and this Earth.
So I'm not going to hit anybody over the head with, like, my theories. I'm just going to say, to be open to it, I think is good science, frankly. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I work with professionals, like archaeological teams, all the time, and we're not in conflict. We have the sense of camaraderie. Like, let's figure this out. You know.
Speaking of which, where Sandra and I live in Warwick, in our neighborhood, there's been, of course, they're redoing the septic systems in the area. That was suddenly put to a halt, because they were redoing a bridge, Bucky Brook on Tidewater Drive. Human remains were uncovered, and they figured that it's an Indian burial site, American Indian burial site. So now the whole area is going to be dug up in certain compartments to find out if this is, in fact, a burial ground, and we don't know what they will find.
There was an 8-foot skeleton in the town history of Burrellville, is that right? Right near there, that I found too, just like your friendly skull here that you brought, one of the kind of intriguing aspects of this mystery is all around the country, even in Europe. I'm writing a book with Hugh about the same phenomena, where this jawbone fit over the face over and over again, specific, like anatomic anomaly. Like,
it's amazing.
Right? So you have the jawbone fitting over the face, and it's like the largest man in town with a full bearded, face. He could pass his hands in between the jawbone.
Wow.
So you can't make that up. That's like a specific, anomaly you're talking about, buried obscurely in like page 600 and 700 in these town and county histories. Yeah. Because the skeptic will come in and say, oh, that's sensationalized garbage, or that's a hoax. It's like, no. Like, the mayor of the town is there, the local professor, the reverend. Yeah. It's like, how do you get around that?
Yeah. John Smith encountered these people. Pocahontas fame, of course, the famed explorer John Smith. Right. He wrote about them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And his maps were so specific that NASA, I'm sorry,
Yeah, we're just taking our time check,
Oh, okay.
We're so involved in our conversation, we wanted to go on as much as possible.
But as well as John Smith, like, all the explorers have specific accounts. It's really stunning. It's not just like 1 or 2 guys, or the Spanish, they were 5'2" and the natives were 5'9". No, this is like Tuscaloosa, Alabama, 7.5 to 8.5 foot tall.
Right, exactly. 9 Men's Misery. Let's briefly touch upon that.
Yeah.
It's, of course, that's in Cumberland, Rhode Island, and Captain Pierce and his men during the King Philip's War, what is now known as King Philip's War. The 9 men were ambushed and essentially skinned alive. They were tortured horribly, and their bodies were left there. Among them was a town, kind of like a lawman. He was a town constable, Benjamin Buckland. And of course, that stone structure where that's why it's called 9 Men's Misery. The bodies were buried in there. And of course, that was kind of like a grave robbing. This anatomy professor took his students there in the late 1700s and started taking it apart. And they did find the skull of Benjamin Buckland, an enormous man, double rows of teeth, double set of teeth, hyperdontia. Now, of course, you're very familiar with that. Any chance, do you think we could come across that again?
It was at the Rhode Island Historical Society for 50 years in a box with the other skulls, right? So I'm like, no pictures, no testimony, no measurements. And then we get to that cairn. That was the level of frustration in the show.
Right.
And we thought it was in there, and then you couldn't. it was like a war memorial. I didn't want to, like a veterans memorial. You can't desecrate
right, exactly.
it. Just like I understand Native American burial mounds, I don't want to go near them. I don't want to like dig up a skeleton. I'm just trying to piece this story together, in reverse. So I understand the sensitive issue of it, but it's a really frustrating thing too. When you talk about Buckland, there was another, I forget his name right now, but in Middleborough, a 7'8" skeleton of a giant white settler who was in the King of Philip's War, and both of these guys had enormous strength that the natives hated to fight them because they were just like supernatural strength, and both had double rows of teeth.
Wow.
And all around the country, from Scientific America in Catalina Island, California, 1864, to Martha's Vineyard, all around the country, in the book I talk about double rows of teeth, right? So how do you come up with a hoax?
Yeah, right.
In an era of inefficient communication, and most of these accounts of double rows of teeth are obscurely buried in town and county histories. So that really destroys the argument that these are hoaxes or misidentified mastodon bones, like they're like animals instead of humans. All these nonsensical amalgam of garbage arguments. So for me, in writing the book, I'm just like, I thoroughly believe there's a story there. And
wonderful, wonderful story. And believe it or not, we're almost out of time. It goes so fast when you get a fascinating topic like this.
Oh, sure. That's. I think we hit the points that I wanted to hit.
Anybody interested in this topic, I highly encourage them to read Giants on Record by Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman. Yep. And you're going to make a trip overseas pretty soon, right?
I'm going back to do the Origins Conference in London. That's with Hugh Newman, Andrew Collins, Michael Cremo. There's a bunch of ancient mysteries researchers there. I'm doing the Edgar Cayce Conference October 6th in Virginia Beach, Virginia. November 4th is the London Conference. A couple working on another book and just pitching another show right now and hoping to be able. We did the Roanoke. That's a really cool story, but that's the one that the giants in this lost world idea. I really want to bring mystery to science and do what we do in our shows: work with skeptics, work with professionals, and try to tell a good story that people are interested in.
Right, exactly. Well, Jim, I can't thank you enough for being on. This is a fascinating topic. I really appreciate it, especially for our 11th year anniversary. A great guest like you. This is fascinating to me. It just, I can't get enough of this. I explore myself, and sometimes I think people get a little intimidated that this is going to rewrite our history. But not necessarily so, because this was our history.
Every Robert Anton Wilson, every fact of science was once damned. It was once a heretical idea, bar none. So, right now it's, this guy's out of his mind. In 50 years, you won't believe what is understood about human history. And, if I build a time machine, I'll come back and tell you, but
hope so.
I can guarantee that.
You're going to come back again and be a guest again, I hope, Jim.
Yes, I'm not too far. I'm right down the road.
Great. New Englander. Anybody from our audience, would you like to come up and meet Jim Vieira in person? And,
it's quite a privilege.
And yes,
my brother laughed.
It is. Thank you so much again, and we look forward to you coming back. And come on, studio audience, come on down.